Hey, good morning. It's a Monday morning, and I've got a little. Don't look so bad. We've got a little wind out there, but it's still a little wet. But hopefully it'll all clear and be beautiful today. So grab your cup of hot coffee, tea, whatever you like, and Nico and I will be right back. Nico's in the black. He's kind of rolling around and trying to dry off some more. We'll be right back. So over this weekend, there was this notice that Trump says, or Trump will make Canada rethink its military spending. And why do we have to do everything that the US says? I'm sort of tired of constantly hearing that, oh, well, we got to do this because the US says, or, just one sec here. Do a whole bunch of things because the US says we have to. We are our own country with our own sovereign government. So I don't think just because they're next door neighbors which we do an awful lot of trade with, but we don't have to do everything they say. And because they elected a president doesn't mean that Canada has to follow suit. It's sort of along the same lines as saying, the U.S. wants to build a wall, but Mexico will pay for it. That's idiotic. If they want a wall, they should have to pay for it on their side of the border. But, there's people in the U.S., and I've mentioned this before, that think the U.S. should just say everything and the rest of the world just falls in line. I think we as Canadians need to really probably now, better than any time, stand on our own 2 feet. Just saying being the yes men to the States doesn't really do us any good. So, we're 23 million strong. Or I think we're more than that. But, I think maybe we do need to spend some more on military spending. But my point is, we shouldn't have to do it because the U.S. government says we have to. I should say, I'm sorry. While the U.S. election was going on, there was, talk how if Trump was elected, he would be leader of the free world. And, my answer to that is, I didn't vote you for leader of the free world, so why would you be speaking for me as leader of the free world? And why should anyone say they're leader of the free world just because the U.S. citizens voted for him? Having the U.S. citizens vote for you, does that make you the better person? There may be better people out there to come up with decision making than you. And just because you're an expert businessman does not mean that you have better talents than anyone else. But, we all seem to bow down to the almighty U.S. And I think this Trudeau advisor, may have something we have to look at. And we may have to look at Canadians need to develop their own skills and end up working and building their own country. During the Cold War, we pretty well did rely on the U.S. But just doing things because the U.S. says we have to is ridiculous. And I don't think we should necessarily follow the commands. Trump seems to think the whole world's just going to bow down to him. And I don't feel we have to. I think, okay, maybe we have to start building up our own military, getting to where we can defend ourselves if we have to, and not rely on the states. But the states seem to think we take things for granted. And, I think we don't. But they seem to think we do. And I think it's time, as Canadians, we stick together and build our country up. I've been happy with the Canada I grew up in. But I don't think we should just sort of, if anything comes from the States, just automatically jump into it. I was so happy when one of the wars, I think it was John Chrétien, said no to the Americans, that Canada wouldn't be there to follow suit. And, that's where I think we need to stay. We need to develop our skills and, be proud of our country. We're not a country just because the U.S. said we are. We are our own sovereign country, and we need to build a military that could defend us. We're not allowed to have nuclear war because America says no. We're not allowed to do this because America says no. It doesn't make any sense. You voted in a president, which I don't necessarily, many Canadians don't agree with, but I think you need to wake up and smell the coffee that as Canadians, we aren't going to follow your lead. That doesn't mean we can't be trading partners. That just means just because you bark orders, we're not going to follow. We have our own government, and as such, we have the right to choose what we want to do. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. We have a right to design our own destinies. And if we don't do that, what good are we? So often people think that things should always stay the same. Well, I don't think things should stay the same, but I think we should be able to move on and grow. For years, Canada was a UK property. And in 1867, we said no. Well, we didn't say no. They wanted to kind of let us go free and let Canada go on its own. So they gave us the British North American Act, which was our first sort of official constitution. But from that point, we thrived with one exception. We were not allowed to do our own external affairs. That was still held on by Britain. And anytime we wanted changes to our constitution, it would have to go back to Britain. In 1937, we changed. And that's when we saw it with the U.S. deal between Canada and the U.S. We signed a fishing treaty. And this fishing treaty was signed off by Canada, the U.S., and the Britain officer was never called to come in and sign for it. That got Westminster under. But since that time, we really have not come back and said, we don't have to go and have anyone else answer for us. In the Constitution Act of 1982, Prime Minister Trudeau, the senior, signed off with Britain that we have our own federal constitution. And we're not looking back. And we're not going to be the younger brother of the big, powerful U.S. And I think we don't have to be. I think we can take our country in our own defense and, not necessarily be dependent on a country. We need to build us up to be a strong union. And, I'm not saying we aren't that now. We are a peace-loving. We have many peacekeepers out there all the time. So why can't we defend our own country? I don't mind that we may have to increase our spending, but I don't like that we have to go back, do it because Trump says so. Something to think about. It's your Canada. It's something to think about. Okay, CBC News is saying a quote from Christy Clark, and here's what Christy Clark says. Says, teachers' court win is an opportunity to invest in kids. Well, if you felt that way from hearing this, why don't you feel that way, and why aren't we investing in kids now? I think you have ads saying that we are number one in the world about our school system. But yet, imagine what we could do if we had smaller classes, that individual topics could be taken care of in the classroom, instead of people just being pushed through subtly. I think we have so much more we can teach our kids. But they need, in the younger ages, in the primary ages, to have a solid understanding of the ABCs, arithmetic, reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's. That's an old expression, but I think for us to be successful in our later years, as BC grows older, is to have kids who are able to compete out there in the real world. And I think we need to get back to getting every kid in BC to get a graduation certificate. Now, my grandmother said years ago that, her daughters graduated with matriculation degrees. And that if you couldn't do a matriculation degree, you graduated with a degree that just got you into the laboring. And then there was the ones we didn't talk about. That was just a degree for the dummies. I don't agree that we go back to that system. But what I agree with, that doing whatever it takes to make sure a kid has that right to walk across the stage and get at least a high school graduation diploma. I think it's something we need to do every single day, is give our kids a fighting chance out there. So many kids turn to crime because they can't get a job, or they do something else because, and they get in trouble. I think if we give them a strong tools, we'll be able to have them build a strong life. A lot of people just say, well, put them back in and just teach them the 3 R's and that'll be fine. Well, you know what? That won't be fine anymore because there's so much more going on in the world. There, I looked at my natural color came back. But I think just saying now that it's an opportunity to invest in Canada, I think you should have known about the opportunity long ago and done something about it. Now, I don't think the spending of the money should be in worthless programs that really don't do anything. And let me tell you an example. And this was from years ago. I went to school. At grade 1, I was taught A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Grade 2, there was a class where the kindergartens and the grade 1s were learning, I think they called it ITA, which was supposed to help with your reading, and it was supposed to be phonics. Well, it messed an awful lot of kids up, including me, because yes, the grade 2s were supposed to be doing their own homework, but you listened in, and if you took a book off the shelf, sometimes it had different lettering. It was really weird, like E's were 2 circles with a line drawn through it. So I don't think we should come up with programs that aren't really going to help our kids. But if you do something like that, make sure it's being able to be integrated back into our school system. I don't think we need to come up with all these grandiose ideas which will not help a kid in the future. Now, it's easy to look back and say, well, these programs didn't work. But I think we need to ensure that Canada is a strong nation. BC plays a part in Canada's future, and we need to ensure that our kids learn the best they can, but they need to do it with a budget that can support that. And there's all different kinds of kids that go to school. There's kids that are high matriculation, and there are kids that can barely read and write that we need to bring up. There's people with learning disabilities. We all have to work on that. However, we need to ensure that we spend the money wisely. Our schools should be in working order. We should be able to have updated textbooks, and that kids need to work on computers. This is all the growing thing. It's not like in the 1800s where you sent the kid to school with a slate and chalk. We need to learn how to teach our kids so that they get the best out of the world. And people are always down on taxes, but why would you be down on taxes when the provincial government is doing more for kids than you could ever have? But you did more than your fathers and mothers did. So it's time that we give our kids a fighting chance. Again, something to think about. Okay, I had another thought. There's so much infighting in our school boards and such to bring and keep costs down. which is great. But when it comes to hiring more teachers and implementing programs that will actually work, we all say, yes, we should all do that. But, how do we rate these programs to make sure it's what we wanted out of them? A lot of times these programs are okay, we'll implement this and we'll go with it. And we'll review it later. And then they never get reviewed and just keep spending the money. That's not the way to do it, people. We need to ensure that every program gets reviewed. And every program, if it's working, keep getting money. But for programs that don't work, move along. Come up with a better way of doing things. We need to build a strong backbone in BC. And having our kids educated is the number one thing we should do. And such as having every person issue a computer. Doesn't mean it goes home with them, just means they have a computer to work on during school hours. Making sure kids can read, making sure kids can write, making sure people can do simple equations. I think we've got away from that. I think we got into, special needs kids and, I can remember my nephew was a special needs student. And they wanted to put him just into a class, back then, where he could learn to write a check. And my sister said, no, he can't handle that. But I think even if he went through, some of that course, he would be able to. So smart use of our money is the best way to go. Okay, CBC also had this interesting bit on senior citizens and how they keep mentally fit by belting out a tune. That's awesome. I think we've got to get more senior citizens to do stuff they like to keep their brains physically fit. So often you work until you're 65, and then at 65 you're said, time for you to retire. Well, I don't necessarily think it is your time to retire. Maybe from work, but not necessarily from doing stuff. Doing a hobby. Going to schools and read, or have students read to you. Spending time backing up the school system. You've gone through years in sometimes different fields that maybe seniors can contribute back to the society. And as long as they're physically fit to do it, I don't see what the issue is. A lot of them want to give back and want to have something to do. I know my mother plays cards, and that's allowed her to keep physically and mentally with it. But I think we should somehow open this up. And I'm just using examples here. If they want to go do art projects, they should be able to go do art projects. We need to ensure that our seniors are able to keep having a fun, fit life. They built our province, our country. So why should they just be put in a home and just sit there and twiddle their thumbs all day? We need to ensure that they, as long as they can do it, get out there and do something. I think you'll find that an awful lot of seniors will be living longer, be healthier. If they go and sit in the corner all the day, they're not going to do much. But that's what we seem to want them to do all the time. We want to ensure that our seniors are just lying around all day. But is that really what we want them to do? So often, the younger generations feel like the grandparents are in the way. And the grandparents call out and say, well, I'd really like to see you sometime. But what do we do? Oh, we're too busy. If it wasn't for your grandparents, you would not be here. But we all seem to push them to not the back, lock them up, well, not lock them up, but put them in a home where we can't see them. We won't go visit them. We'll go on with our own lives. That's not fair. We need to ensure that our seniors are better taken care of. Now, a lot of our seniors now have been and are vets because back then that was the thing to do. You wouldn't, it was a way to get a paycheck. But they did an awful lot. And now a lot of our seniors are in broken down wheelchairs because they can't get funding for it. And even to get anything from Veterans Affairs or Veterans Canada is a mouthful of paperwork and waiting around and begging and pleading. And they shouldn't have to do this. But yet, they seem that they just keep doing that and we keep ignoring them. And, an old person who may be looking in the change purse for change to pay a bill, we kind of roll our eyes. And I think we've lost respect. When I grew up, it was in the 70s, and in our household, you still had to respect your seniors all the time. But, it was the fun-loving 70s, and seniors were kind of pushed aside. But why? Why are we allowing this to happen? If you have grandfathers, listen to their stories. You may actually learn something. So often, that helps you in histories or socials class because you find out what it was actually like in the Second World War. So often they teach histories from, Stalin went to Yalta and the President Roosevelt and Churchill went to Yalta. But what was happening in day-to-day lives in Canada? My step-grandfather came over here from Germany, and in 1938, 39-ish, my stepfather came home from school, and the police or the army had come and cleared everything out of their home because they were German. And, they all had to expected to, and I learned about this. Well, I had a yearning for history, but I learned about this from listening to his story, and I brought it up in my history class one day, that, there was an awful lot spoken about Hitler and the Holocaust. And that was terrible, and we should not forget that. But little was done about what happened to Japanese Canadians and Americans. They had all settled from years ago on the west coast of Canada, U.S. They were hurled into internment camps and they were hauled off to live in the interior because they thought they were going to send, information. And, whenever there's a problem, we see it today with the Muslims and, certain number of Muslims start to fight and, come up with these ways to blow up the States or blow up in Canada. And I think if we start treating people as people, we may end up with a better system. So what I'm trying to say is seniors, we can learn so much from them. Not just sitting there and, oh God, they want to see me again. Oh, do I have to go out? I was lucky enough, I had three grandfathers, three grandmothers. And I would do anything to have them back. But they have all passed on. And I think if you keep your kids away from your grandparents or any senior, you're closing them off to a vast part of their education. We need to keep them around as long as possible so they can teach our kids. Something to think about. So in our closing thoughts tonight, we need to ensure that our seniors are taken care of and that we learn all we can from them. It brings our families closer together. We need to stand up and become strong Canadians and build a strong country for ourselves. And not do everything other countries say we need to do. And we need to invest in our schools. Anyway, have a great night, and we'll talk to you later. And we'll see you on Tuesday morning.